Yeah, welcome to this video. This is a new episode of Viewer Games. Yeah, your games reviewed on the channel. Yep, let's get going. This is a game that was sent to me by the black player here. And his handle is anti-shatter. And this is an online game. Yeah, this is why it's a handle. It's a game played on chess.com. And his opponent Desperado 14. Yeah, they both are rated somewhat nearby each other. Desperado 14 is rated 1400 on chess.com and Anti-Shatter is rated 1300, so that you can put it into perspective. It is a game that was played with 30 minutes per side with no increment. Yeah, ICC by default shows 15. Don't be irritated by that. The times here are not relevant. Yeah, the real time allotted for the game was 30 minutes per player. So we've got one e4 and our viewer here, and I switched it to see it from our viewer's perspective. I think that makes sense because he sent the game to me and he should view the game from his perspective. So let's see. We've got a Caro-Kann defense and white goes for the so-called Panov attack, the capture on d5 and then the move c4. Yeah, this is a very direct approach against the Caro-Kann and a line that can be recommended to players who enjoy free piece play. Yeah, white, as we see, has very good natural ways to develop his pieces, and quite often we will get a position that will have an isolated queen's pawn. For example, if let's say knight f6 is played, which is actually happening in the game, knight f6, and let's say just say knight c3, e6, knight here develops and something like that. White will have an isolated queen pawn in compensation for that weakness in structure. He has very nice active pieces that can come out on aggressive squares. In that game, white played knight f3, however. This move is of course not bad. It cannot be bad. It's a good developing move. It is, however, putting a little bit less pressure on black than the move knight to c3. Why is that? Knight c3 is a little bit more pressing in this situation to increase the pressure on that d5 pawn. One reason why this can be important is that black very much would like to fianchetto his king's bishop, yeah, to get castling quickly and have the bishop pointed, oops, that was a wrong arrow, have that bishop pointed directly at the IQP. Yeah, since Rubinstein, we know that we should fianchetto against the isolated queen pawn if possible. Here, in fact, after g6, the situation is not so comfortable for black, as a move like queen b3 can be quite annoying. Yeah, if white takes, black takes, and white takes here, then this pressure forces the move e6. And now we see why knight c3 is more precise. We have this combined pressure on that pawn, and black now has to play, as we have seen, either e6 here, which is a bit awkward. Yeah, you don't want e6 and g6. Yeah, or what he normally does is to play bishop g7 and simply give up that pawn and try to play a gambit out of that. That's a quite interesting line actually for black, which is, it's a little bit dodgy, a little bit, but interesting to play. This is, however, far more testing than knight f3. That move order is puts less pressure on d5, and this makes it a bit awkward, a bit easier for black now to get their g6 setup in. Our viewer played knight c6. I would actually consider g6 here already, trying to quickly get this settled. Something like this, for example. If white now goes queen b3, we can capture and castle. Yeah, and now this is in fact looking rather stupid in some way, because knight c6 will come with a later knight a5 threat. So g6 now would be very desirable to play, but he didn't. He played knight c6, which is of course not bad. It's just that I would have gone first, or first chance, given I would have gone for the fianchetto. White now played bishop e2, and this is a little bit similar in nature to knight a3. This move is a bit passive. Yeah, I think it's more testing to put the knight out first and again put some pressure on that pawn. Here black has some choice. He can play e6. Yeah, that's a very conservative approach. Bishop g4 is more interesting. Yeah, setting up that pin. That can lead to very sharp play after c takes, knight takes, queen b3. Or, and this is currently the fashionable move, g6. This is actually what I play in this position. It's not that I play the Caro-Kann that often, but sometimes you can get this position of our openings from the English opening via c4, c5. I don't want to spend too much time on the opening here, but here after g6 there are a couple of interesting possibilities. This is one of them, where white has this funny intermediate move threatening on f7, and now black usually goes here. White takes. Yeah, black has to give up that piece. He cannot rescue it. If you look at this, for example.
Check. Check.
Yeah, and this is a disaster for black. Yeah, knight g6 takes, and here black goes back and now plays e6. And this kind of position is very, very interesting. I recently had that in a blitz game. I think it's not released yet, that game, but will be shortly. That's a very interesting position for both sides to play. Black has got the bishop pair, but of course he's got a somewhat bad structure there. In general, it is something that I quite like for black to play. Yeah, white, however, played bishop e2. And now our viewer played e6, which is not bad, but I would go g6. If possible, fianchetto against the coming IQP structure. A good thing is also, if you look at this, and white goes for c5, which he did in the game, in this kind of setup, even here the bishop is nicely placed because it pressurizes that d4 pawn and supports a further e5 push. So it's really better on g7. Okay, e6, castles, bishop d6. Yeah, here I'd rather play bishop e7, because we see in the game, white went c5 here and bishop g5. And now we see a typical thing. If you put the bishop somewhere else than e7, in this case here it's c7, then you're sitting in that pin. And it's a little bit awkward to play now, yeah. You go h6, yeah, that you can do, and bishop h4. That was played. Yeah, and now you're sitting there and you wonder, how am I ever going to get rid of that bloody pin? Yeah, of course you can play g5, but this is not very desirable. And yeah, how are you going to play? I never move the queen from d8. That looks difficult to do. It's a little bit awkward here. Still, I think that black should probably castle, and still has, of course, a playable position. He didn't commit any serious mistake or anything. I'm just, what I pointed out to now are mostly suggestions how to play more ambitiously and a little bit more precisely, but there weren't any mistakes committed yet. However, black's next move, our viewer's next move, is a mistake. He played b6. This move, from a strategic point of view, is very much commonplace in this structure. When those pawns have advanced, like this c4, c5 and d4, you often want to attack this chain. And with b6, he's doing that. This is actually coming at a moment where b4 is even possible, because I can put it on the board. Yeah, b4, knight takes, queen a4 is rather embarrassing. But the problem is, really, it would be great if white would be committed to capturing. Yeah, then we would recapture. I wonder, probably with the bishop. Yeah, we would recapture, and this is definitely to black's gain, yeah? Trading the b pawn against the c pawn. And here you sometimes even have possibilities to do something with the bishop here. Maybe a5, bishop a6. if circumstances permit that. The real problem, however, with the move b6 is different. And it's something that happens quite often. If you go b6, you see what is the disadvantage of that move. It has left a piece unprotected, the knight on c6. The knight on c6 is not stable anymore. It had a stable home there with the pawn on b7. Now this is gone. And white, in fact, has an opportunity to use this fact to his advantage. What white can do here is he can play queen a4 or bishop b5. They are both strong. Using that pin. Yeah, and now it's really awkward. How should black respond? Probably black has to go bishop b7. If you go bishop d7 after this and bishop b5, it gets also really, really awkward. Yeah, now you have to play probably knight to e7. And yeah, I mean, white can just continue here with knight c3, or he can consider this move, which sends this bishop home. This is not totally clear cut, as black has got e5. But in general, it looks a bit awkward. It really does. And you can argue if bishop b5 immediately might be stronger. Yeah, actually, that might be the case. Yeah, here, if here knight e7, c6 back, this is clearly better in comparison, because here there is no e5 coming. Let's say white is playing a normal move, knight c3. Or do we want to go back? Let's say a6. That's not even threatening something, but we can go back. This is awkward for black. He's kind of boxed in. That pawn is a nuisance. You cannot go b5. Yeah? You can take here. It's really a problem. I think this is probably the more promising reply, even though even here it gets tricky. After bishop here, there's queen d7, which is kind of okay as we get in a6. But the problem is knight e5. This is an issue. Now we are again threatening here on c6. And yeah, what to do? I think black has to go g5, as weird as it looks. This is not so clear. So probably bishop g3. Yeah, and now black is in trouble. Yeah, that knight on e5 is attacking on c6, and probably black doesn't have anything better than take that. And this is just very, very awkward. Yeah, you've got many weak squares, and the king. Where do you go with your king? Black is just in trouble. Yeah, that was something that white could have done after b6. And it's something to take from this game. If your opponent plays a move that basically undefends one of his pieces, yeah, giving him some liability, it's often a good idea to check the moves that attack that piece directly. Yeah? Sometimes you can push it back or gain the initiative simply because, well, you attack it. He has to react. Yeah, and often this is kind of piling up. If something is uncoordinated, it always has to be checked if we can attack that piece, that weak spot directly. And this is what white should have done here. He played knight c3, however, just developing. And now our viewer captured on c5. Yeah, that's certainly yeah, very principled after having played b6. However, white again had a good possibility here in bishop b5. Even now, this is a rather strong move, setting up the pin. Yeah, this is certainly promising for white. e5 is not easily played. Or, alternatively, if the queen takes, there is queen a4, which again is very awkward. Has to go back. And now, let's say rook e1, threatening knight d5. But there are many, many good ways now. Yeah, we see that white is fully developed. He's threatening knight d5. And black really has huge problems even coming up with a decent move. Probably the best continuation is this. And now castles. But here, this is just better for white without black having any kind of counterplay. he recaptured, however, probably pretty routinely. Yeah, this happens quite often. You get a pawn taken and you just recapture without thinking too much. Here there was an opportunity still on if you have played bishop b5. Yeah, now castles by black, and white went knight d4. That's actually a good move, and a move that asks a very important, crucial question. What about that c6 knight? Do you want to defend it, or do you want to take on d4? Yeah, the black player, our viewer, took on d4, which I think is not so great. I mean, he had a very concrete idea that we will see in the game, but I think it was better here to keep the tension a little bit and play probably just bishop b7. Yeah, what about this position? If we check this, it's very unbalanced. Black has a complete center, e and d pawn, while white has 3 pawns against 1 pawn on the queen side. Quite often this will lead to very sharp play, as the queenside pawns will try to push forward to get passes, while black will push the center and already also has a pass pawn, the d pawn, but he will push the center, often trying to combine that with activating against white's king. Very sharp stuff. Who's better? Difficult to say. I'd probably rather be white, but it is about equal, I guess. The computer believes that it's about equal. It's just, I would probably prefer white a little bit. One reason is that it's not so easy at the moment for black to actually get that center in motion. One reason is that this pin is really awkward and very difficult to get rid of. That means that quite often you cannot easily go e5, for example, as after a capture on d5, d5 will fall. So it's not a center that can be pushed forward very, very quickly. An important point is that here after bishop b7, white also has to move f4, which puts a stop to e5 ideas pretty seriously. Yeah? It's very, very difficult now to get in e5. Yeah, I think that this is what he should have done, and not taking. Taking is a typical case of releasing the tension, and quite often releasing the tension, some kind of conflict, if one side resolves it, it's often to that side's disadvantage. It's often better to keep the tension. Yeah. And here that was probably one of those cases where bishop b7 was a little bit better. If we see and think of this in a very abstract way, yeah, we have two pieces that are in play. Black exchanges one piece that is in play, but white gets his queen out. So in the process, white has actually gained some activity for that queen for free. It's like a mathematical equation, yeah? Knight minus knight equals active white queen. Yeah, and that's not a good trade-off. Yeah, white in the process got something out of that trade. It's not a trade on totally equal terms. And the queen on d4 is not badly placed. It's nice in the center, looking at both wings, and it might support that b4 and so on push. The thing is, I believe that our viewer here had a very concrete idea. He went e5. He played e5. And this was probably what he was planning with that knight takes d4 move. However, this e5 move has a drawback. I think what he probably should do is something like a6 or bishop b7 again. If we go a6, for example, yeah, to cover that square, then f4, rook b8, b4 is a typical continuation. I just want to show the type of position that might happen. Yeah, white has huge space, c5 and so on. e5 is relatively well under the wraps, and I think white is somewhat better. The computer gives white half a pawn, which seems fair. So it's a little bit more than a minuscule advantage. It's something. It's stangable, but it's not overwhelmingly great. He went e5, however, and after that it gets very, very critical. The thing is, it all would be nice if black would be able to push forward his center. Let's say white would move the queen again. Then everything's fine. Yeah, black can even consider to start with g5 and go from here. Yeah, like let's say a6 to prevent any knight b5 business and then push forward. I know g5 is weakening, but well, those pawns here in the center, they are quite strong. And if you have such a strong central presence, the weakening with g5 is not as important. This is, however, a purely hypothetical thing, because white will of course take on f6, and this is what he did in the game. Bishop f6. Yeah, and now you either give up d5 or you get to the game position. Yeah, I mean, black can theoretically speaking do this and try to get some compensation for his pawn there. It's not going to be enough, but it's not totally terrible, let's say, to try to hold this position. It's not very attractive, but it's a question if the game is worse actually. Yeah, because in this kind of situation you always have the hope that at some point you might get opposite colored bishops. That's a typical thing why quite often the bishop pair is a good compensation for a pawn, as you sometimes can use your active bishops in that regard that you swap the one bishop that you need to get opposite colored bishops. For example, in a situation like this, when white puts the knight at one point on one of those central squares, it can be easily imaginable that the bishop will take that knight and then we would have opposite colored bishops. So playing this with black here, as I said, is not a much fun prospect, but it's actually a question if the game is worse. Black took on d4. I understand that he did that. I'm not criticizing. It's just interesting that giving up the pawn might have been an option, really. Yeah, rook d8. You can also take with the bishop here. Knight d5. Rook b8, b3, bishop b7. Again, a position a pawn down where black has slight hope of drawing, because we will probably be able to take that knight for opposite colored bishops. Not fun, but again, you have to be quite modest there already. He took with the rook, however, which is of course also more logical, keeping that pawn for the moment. White went knight b5, and black played bishop e5. That's pretty much forced and rather obvious. We have to take, we have to use that bishop to cover that pawn on d4. Yeah, now we come to a crucial moment of this game. Let's take stock here. What has happened in the last couple of moves? We have had a transformation of the pawn structure. Black had to take there on d4, which has destroyed his structure. He's got a doubled pawn there. However, it's a passer. The d pawn is passed on d4. So there is some danger that those pawns, there are two of them actually, that these pawns might do something. Black has got the bishop pair. That's good. Always a useful asset to have. White has got a 3. Let's unpaint a little bit. 3 against 1 majority. And if white succeeds in making sure that the d pawns, black's d pawns, don't get too active, if white can ensure that, then those 3 pawns against 1 pawn would be a huge asset that probably will win the game. The whole thing, however, now is very, very concrete. You cannot get by with some general considerations here. This position has to be played with very, very concrete and solid calculation. What should white do? It's clear that knight on b5 has only one purpose. It wants to capture that pawn on d4. Yeah? And it's not a difficult task to go there. A move that was not played, but I want to show to you now, is rook a to d1. That would be, if you look at this position from the white side for one moment, if you collect, or if you compile an overview of candidate moves, you would probably start with the both rook moves to d1, because you want to take that pawn there. Why not win that pawn? You want to probably go rook a d1 to get out of this diagonal, even though rook f d1 should be looked at as well. This is, however, in comparison not as clear as after this. Now that knight doesn't have a great square. That's a difference to rook a d1. If we have rook a d1 here, and the rook can safely take, let's say here and here. Yeah, that's the difference there of those two lines. Though rook a d1 is probably best answered, if we continue that line, with rook e8. Yeah, if you go d3 and jettison the pawn in that way, as we said, this, and now bishop b2. Rook d2, note that this bishop doesn't have many squares. To f6, let's say, and now white is cashing in on that pawn and is close to taking this. For example, after bishop e6,
Check.
takes, rook c2, white has an excellent endgame that he will probably win. I mean, it's not the easiest task ever, but he will probably win that. We see that ultimately one of those pawns dropped, first this one and then ultimately the second d pawn. So something to take on d4 is just the most logical, because it really gives this knight, provides this knight with some sense. It's on b5 to take there. The white player, however, didn't do that. He didn't play rook a d1. He played a very mysterious move. He played the move a4. And I honestly have no idea why this was played, because it absolutely doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, there are cases where you see a move and you don't understand the purpose. Or let's say you understand it's not good, but you understand what the idea was. And here I'm absolutely not sure what the idea was, because the knight, I mean, he secures the square a3 for the knight a little bit more. But really, you want to go to a3? Yeah, he wants to go to a3. After a6 now, white went to a3. And this is just a weird idea. Yeah? Why misplace that knight on the edge of the board, and in the same process also weaken the queenside? We have to understand that something like that, rook on a b file, is very awkward, always attacking b2, and the pawns, b4 pawn especially, cannot push forward. The worst, however, is that knight on a3 is totally offside. So a very mysterious decision by the white player. In this particular case, in this particular position now, it's very interesting what black played. He played the move rook e8. And while I understand the point, rook e8, it goes on half open file, and it also threatens something. Bishop takes h2, winning a pawn. It's not the best move. Why? Because black had something better, and something that really perfectly addresses why that knight b5 and then a4, knight a2, knight a3, why that knight a3 idea was a mistake. Black now had the very strong move bishop to f5. And this is a move that, again, serves more than one purpose. Those moves are always, not always, chess is very concrete, sometimes not, but moves with more than one purpose are very often good moves. And this move is a multi-purpose move. We intend to push d3, activating that pawn further, advancing it further, opening up the bishop. Yeah, let's just see this. We attack b2 indirectly, with that d3 threat, and with the knight on a3 and the rook on a1. That's a very unlucky situation to be in. Yeah, and additionally, with the bishop on f5, White has no chance now, no opportunity to block that pawn with putting the bishop, let's un-arrow here. I cannot put the bishop on d3 as a blockader, that's controlled. And this is an additional nice benefit that knight on a3 now cannot even come to c2. So white has totally misplaced his own position there with a4 and knight a3. Probably white will play a move like that, yeah, putting something here to maybe get in bishop d3, but it doesn't really help a lot. Let's say black plays, there's got a nice number of options. Rook to b8 is interesting, or also rook to c8. This and this is interesting, or this also makes some sense. If white now tries to cover with b4, we play d3 and will win a huge amount of material. Bishop f5 was not played, but it would have been exceptionally strong. I think very difficult for white to get some playable game after that. He simply basically hit the self-destruct button with a4 and knight a3. However, this was played, rook e8. Bishop d3, that's a good and logical move. Yeah, blocking that pawn, preventing bishop f5. That is very good. And now our viewer went g6. That has an idea and not a great one. And what do you see? g6. Better is probably to start with a move like this, bishop d7, to attack on a4. Yeah, for example, like this, we attack here, f4, and now a5. This would be something that is still rather okay for black. Yeah, no real issues. However, he went g6, and this is as I said, the radical idea, and that was the idea. Yeah, just setting up this trade. I understand the idea from a activity point of view. This is interesting, trying to lift that blockade to push the pawns further on, but the problem is it's simply you taking too many. You're suffering from too many strategic problems here. The pawn structure is a total disgrace. Yeah, I mean it just doubled pawns, isolated pawns, and whatnot. And white is having this 3 against 1, 2, 3 against 1 on the queen side, which will be very dangerous. So it is really not the way to do it with bishop f5, g6, and bishop f5. White now plays the move f4. Yeah, is that a good move? No, it's not. And it's a pretty typical mistake that in one shape or form quite often happens. White here had to ask himself, where do I want to go? What is my desired setup in this position? And he has one. Yeah. If we imagine this knight here is really a bad piece, you want to activate it, you want to give it some useful things to do. What black should do is he should start with a move like rook d1 to stop the d pawn. So after d3, oops, we can happily take. And then next would be this knight, moving it away from the edge of the board. Possible good squares to go to are first and foremost d3. Yeah, that would be a great blockading square, supporting those pawns on c5 and b4 and blocking the d pawn. White also might have the option to travel to f3 and then take here. Yeah, so many opportunities. In any case, white has a pretty big advantage here. And one problem is black has no real counterplay. What is black's counterplay? You cannot attack one of white's pawns. They are very securely defended and organized. White, however, okay, I have to put this back. White, however, didn't play rook d1. He played the move f4. Why is this a typical mistake? Because white just had this typical impulse. Okay, f4, I attack the bishop. He has to move it. True. But do we gain from that, really? The answer is no. The move f4 is just, Yeah, it's just a tickle. Yeah, it just says, okay, move the bishop, okay, and black is not blundering it, but moving it, which is not tough to do. We just retreat that piece. Everybody sees that. And now what has white accomplished? With the f pawn now on f4, there's a totally different situation regarding those squares. On the e file now, white has a couple of weaknesses, especially e4 and e3. e2 is not much of a difference, but e4 and e3, that's a difference. And what is the consequence? Black has now some counter play ideas that I would like to paint, but software doesn't let me. What the heck? I want to unpaint, please. Okay, I had to pause the video for a moment and fix something, but now we're back and kicking. Yes, so this was the position f4, and as we said, these squares have been weakened, and this helps black a lot. Yeah, he can get this rook in here or here, sometimes e2, and generate some counterplay. f4 was just a move that like, ha, I can attack your bishop, and further inspection reveals it doesn't lead anywhere. Okay, what did white do after this? Bishop f6, let me have a look. Rook 81, yeah, sure, that makes sense. And now black played rook e3. Yeah, that looks like a decent enough move. It's activated. However, here black had a slightly better opportunity, and this was a5. It's just something that it's a concrete thing that is here possible in this position after f4 and rook d1 has been played. a5 breaks up the white pawn structure. The important point is that after b5 there's bishop e7, and now this is hanging, and white cannot even take here, as here he would lose. That's this one drawback of f4. So what is it that white has to do after a5? He has to play knight b5, after which a likely continuation is something like that. Black has to step out of that knight c7 move. So let's say rook d8 takes rook c8, and now we can try to pick up those pawns. The thing is that the most likely outcome here is an endgame, like, let's see, rook c1, rook c6, rook d1, rook a5, knight d4,
check,
takes, and while white has a symbolic advantage with the a-pawn, this will end in a draw if black is not doing something immensely stupid. a5 was a good opportunity here because it makes sure that white's pawn structure is destroyed. Yeah, white absolutely would like to play b5 to keep this pawn formation intact, but he cannot, as we have seen, because of bishop e7. This is why a5 was a good opportunity here. It's something that has to be checked all of the time. If the opponent has a dangerous pawn formation that might roll forward, we have to check opportunities to kill the soundness of that structure, trying to attack it, isolate pawns. Here, with white taking at a later stage, all those pawns will be weak. Yeah, of course, the line that we had is better. Yeah, first this, oops, and then this. But we see all of them are weak. And in effect, black will probably win all of those pawns at one point, or get them at least for trades against the d pawns, possibly the f pawn, and then he will draw maybe a pawn down endgame 3 against 2 on one wing. So black's aim is to trade off basically the whole queenside here. If that succeeds, the big server delay, if that succeeds, then he's very satisfied. You have to be content with such a with that attitude to just get a draw out of this. More is not possible. He played rook e3. Rook e4 was interesting as well, but okay, rook e3 was played. Knight c2 and rook b3. Rook e4 was maybe a little bit tougher. Yeah, now here white had a good opportunity that he did not take. Instead of playing knight takes d4, which is what he did, he had rook f3. That was an interesting alternative trying to get rid of that active rook. If black takes, then white's advantage will be very, very pronounced, because now all of those crucial squares are nicely protected, and white even has good chances to get in the perfect blockade on d3. After rook f3, black probably should play rook b2, and now white can take. And we see that compared to the game, yeah, let's compare that to the game, white has gained the move rook f3 for free. Here he took, and black took on b4. So we have gained a move essentially. Rook f3, rook b2 was inserted, and that was a good, nice way to increase the advantage. Basically winning a tempo because black could not take. Now after knight takes d4, black took on b4, knight f5. Yeah, interesting here. Now our viewer played king to h7. A move that I regarded with much skepticism. It looks a bit passive, but I'm not totally sure, and actually, if this is good or not. I was thinking that black has better chances with rook d8. It might be true, but I'm not totally sure. The endgame is very, very sharp. Rook d8, I mean,
check.
If white takes that pawn, and king f8, we have a funny position. At the moment, white is 2 pawns up, but the d pawn is dangerous, and of course the bishop is potentially the far better piece here than the knight. The situation is not clear. It's not like just +2 or something, white is 2 pawns. That's not true. White definitely has to be precise here to keep black's initiative at bay. Possible continuation. It's difficult to get to a conclusive point here. Like, let's say here, rook takes a4, rook b1, rook c8, and knight f5. Yeah, d4. Something d4 is not possible, right? That's c7. But knight f5. Let's stop at that point. Maybe black can check on d4 or something. Yeah, he's regained 1 pawn. Still under pressure. It's still a pawn down. But I think practical chances are okay here for black. He can still hope to draw this game. King h7 looked a bit passive to me. And after all, you're giving up a pawn there as well. Rook d5, rook b8, intending to play rook b1. So rook d8 was very much preferred over king h7. Rook b8, yeah, probably intending rook b1. Now rook d to d1 was played. That's a bit conservative, but not bad. There was a better move here even for white in this awkward server delay, in rook d6. Looking at that pawn, bishop has to go there, and now takes, and rook c1 is very strong for white. Probably enough to win, because the c pawn is just too dangerous. Yeah, if black starts to collect pawns here, then this and rook d8 will ensure promotion. Rook d6 was a pretty clear winner. However, I think starting from here, the game was certainly influenced by the time situation. Rook dd1 doesn't spoil anything, but it's not as forceful, quite obviously. Yeah, black played king to g6. Could have taken on a4 as well. g4, h5, and h3. Instead of h3, white again had a win, but this time it was trickier with this here. That's quite neat. Rook d6. What is the idea? If black takes, we go here.
Check.
And now knight c6 is a fork. Yeah, I misread my notes there. But it is knight c6. Don't need a note for that. It's just a fork. Rook d6 was strong, but white went h3, which is understandable. It's a typical reaction in a blitz situation or in a very short time control situation. Just cover that. Rook took on a4.
Check.
the server delay is awful. What is happening here? Rook took on e4, then c6 was played, and black went back to c4. Rook c1, I think that's all rather logical. Now
Check.
black inserted that check here, and white took c7, rook c8,
Check.
check. All that is totally okay. f6, yeah, king g7 was a bit tougher, and g5. Yeah, looks awkward, but it's still not totally easy. a5,
Check.
check, rook c6, a4. Yeah, black has to push that pawn. That's the only hope left for him. Yeah, here white already could have played f5. Yeah, just pushing things home, but he didn't do that. He played rook b1. This is slightly mysterious. I understand that rook b8 was the intention, but it has a drawback. Whoop. And this. He probably overlooked that rook f to f8 was possible. So it was much better here to use the f pawn right here and push forward. For example, like this.
Check. 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 Check.
And white wins rather easily. This is a mistake. I think he overlooked that the rook could come back, but the game was certainly already very heavily influenced by the time situation. That is according to the notes that the black player anti-shatter here sent to me. Rook f to f8. White took. And what about this endgame? Is this still a win for white? I don't think so. I think that is a draw. And in the game we see how that progressed. Rook a6. Yeah, white should have tried. Actually, it's a draw after that. Sorry. White still had king f2. And with that, he would have had at least slightly better chances to do something. Let's say a3. Rook c2. a2 takes. c7, rook a6. Rook c3. And something like that, h4. It should be a draw, but it's a little bit tougher. Maybe white can do something else here. Maybe if white prevents, it's still a draw. I was just thinking, this is what the engine is suggesting, but it's still a draw. Yeah, the idea is that engine wants to get this in, but it won't help. There is no way forward. The moment white is trying to run around here with the rook, we will always have checks and we will counter-attack the h-pawn. That's still not leading anywhere. Like this, I'm just staying. And if I go for that,
check, check,
I can give a ton of checks. And
check.
you don't get anywhere. No, it is just a draw. Yeah, so it probably didn't matter what white did. I was thinking that maybe king f2 is a little bit tougher, but it's not a big difference. This is what we got. Yeah, king f7 is not really necessary. Could have taken immediately, but it doesn't really matter that much. We get exactly the kind of position that I had shown earlier.
Check, check.
Yeah, this is actually,
check.
Yeah, those checks. This is a mistake a little bit. I mean, it doesn't really hurt black, but it's a typical thing, especially if you have no time. You tend to give checks because it feels right. Yeah, because it feels like if you give a check, you cannot really make a mistake. He has to react. But in fact, here white is driving the king. Black is driving the king upwards towards your position. It is much easier here to just cut off on the second rank and ask white, okay, what are you going to do? Yeah, if he does that, okay. And what is he doing? Shuffling like that, maybe?
Check.
No, can't even go up here. Yeah, it's totally draw. Yeah, if you put the rook on the second rank, It's much easier
Check.
than the checks. It doesn't
Check.
really, it doesn't lose, yeah. I mean, it is
Check.
still a draw, even with the king coming up the board.
Check.
But the real issue comes
Check.
later. The thing is, it was absolutely not necessary to even let the king, white's king, advance that
Check.
far. Yeah, this is what happened, yeah, to move 53. And here, black, with absolutely no time, made a mistake. And this is something that is of huge practical value here, to look at this situation. If you have no time, really no time, and you are in a rook endgame, a pawn down, you absolutely never trade rooks. Never, 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 ever. Unless you clearly see that you can liquidate all of the pawns. And he went rook f7 here, and this just loses the game. The thing is, it ends in a draw, but we will see what happened because of the time. But you can absolutely never trade rooks when you are a pawn down in the rook endgame, unless you're absolutely 100%, 1000% sure that you get all the pawns. And here it's pretty clear that black won't get the pawns because it's protected on g5. And especially in a situation where the other side has a protected passer, the rook trade will definitely lose. I understand that this was basically in blitz and bullet mode, so we shouldn't be too critical here. But it's a good rule of thumb that will be right almost all the time. Don't trade rooks when you are pawn down in the rook endgame. The king and pawn endgame will be lost in the vast majority of cases. Unless you are absolutely sure that it is right. And you can only be totally sure if you have more time to check it out. Yeah, because there will only be a couple of exceptions where the rook endgame or the king and pawn endgame, a pawn down, will be actually a draw. Our viewer blend rook f7 and white duly traded. Yeah, and now actually basically all moves win. Yeah, it is impossible now, as white is so active, to avoid the invasion. Yeah, king f4 doesn't make much sense. It's a time issue. King e6 was better, but even king f4 is winning. It's black is absolutely in no position to avoid what happens.
Check.
And here, after king f6, king g8, it ended in a draw. Why? Time. Time. White's time ran out. So a bit unlucky for the white player that he didn't get the victory there, which was ultimately probably a deserved one after that rook f7 blunder. It ended in a draw, so a lucky end of for our viewer here, who got saved by the bell, so to say. That was an interesting game, and I think it was played on a very, very decent level if you consider both players' ratings and the time control. Yeah, they didn't really commit any I don't know, blunder of pieces or something like that. It was a very interesting game. If we, without going into much detail, do a quick recap, what did happen here? White early on established that c5 formation, gaining some space and ultimately preparing a queenside assault. Black was suffering from that pin a little bit, and now with b6 initiated that play against the chain. That is a good idea strategically, but was mistimed. Queen a4 or bishop b5, queen a5, no, queen a4 or bishop b5 would have exploited that. But white didn't take that chance, played knight c3, and now after knight d4, that trade, as we said, was a bit premature. Black went e5, after which we got that transformation into the endgame. Here, mysteriously, white avoided rook d1 and played a4. After rook d1, he would have had a nice advantage, while after a4, knight a3 here, black had bishop f5 for a very good position. Instead, he went rook e8. Yeah, maybe being tempted by that threat, after which white got a blockade, and yeah, he resolved that with this bishop f5 idea, and now was in trouble if white would have played rook d1. He went f4, however, and now after this, with a5 here, a5, black could have gotten enough counterplay, which he did not do. And he landed ultimately into that very bad endgame that continued for a while without with white being okay. And it was all very fine from the white player's perspective until he went rook b1 and blundered that f4 pawn basically. Yeah, and that rook endgame is a draw, even though black is a pawn down. That he ultimately offered that ill-advised rook trade is probably really due to the time situation. So at the end he had a lucky draw because of the time. Again, I'm always advocating to play with an increment. 30 minutes and 0 increment is just less, I think, less quality of a game as 25 minutes and 10 seconds, because you don't get that all of a sudden draw ends. Yeah? Why is that a draw? I mean, white has 2 pawns and wins easily. Anyway, I think it was a good, interesting game. I hope you enjoyed that. I still have tons of viewer games to go through. It just takes a long while to prepare it and record it. And you see, I didn't even expect that this video would be so long. But I hope you enjoyed it. I think it was a good fight. Thanks for watching.